Hello everyone, a very good afternoon. I hope you all attempted the pre-Pareekshan test and are not just here for the discussion. So first I would like to take up experience from students who attempted this test. How was the test? What are your takeaways? Anybody? You can raise your hand. I'll allow you to speak. No voice? Am I clearly audible to everyone? Looks like difficult than real. Is it your first attempt? For people who attempted this for the first time and who are going to appear in this year's prelims examination, the paper will be on similar difficulty level. Okay, because you are seeing the paper for last 8 months since the prelims has been conducted. That is why it seems easy after a point of time. When you solve the exam paper in the real exam like conditions, that is when the real difficulty level comes in front of us, right? So you can speak as well. I would allow some of you to speak if you want to speak about the experience. What are your takeaways and everything? Anybody? Yes, Rohan. I'll unmute you. Unmute.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Rohan.
Sir, so I scored 50.18.
Okay, perfect.
I know that's not a great score. So this
see the score is not something that what we are looking for while attempting this test. The main thing that you need to focus on right now is what were the things that you need to improve upon from here, right? Or what were the key mistakes that you did while attempting the paper? Or what all portions are still to be revised before the examination, right?
For me, that particular section would be history, sir.
Okay.
So I attempted 17 questions in history and I got only 3 questions correct.
Okay.
And polity, my accuracy level was 85%, geography it was 70%, and rest other economics it was 89%. Rest other topics it was good. And compared to history, I particularly feel I lack in medieval and ancient history.
Okay, perfect.
Modern is still fine, but I lack in ancient and medieval history.
Absolutely fine. Rohan, you have said that you attempted 17 questions in history.
Yes, sir.
Out of which there were only 3 to 4 which were correct, right?
Only 3 correct.
Only 3 correct. So one thing from here on is you improve upon your knowledge of history. First thing, your strategy towards history. Second thing is, even when you don't know much about history, let's say you are not that prepared, not that well prepared for the history section, then you should have attempted a bit lesser as compared to the 17 attempts, right? So that is one takeaway that you have on your hand, right? Yes. So this discussion is not about the solutions to the questions. You've already got the solutions, right?
Yes, true.
The solutions are already there on the e-learn platform. You can always go and understand the solution, what exactly was required to solve any particular question. What we are looking at here is, because only 100 days are left for the prelims examination of this year, we will have to focus on what we have to improve from here upon, or what should be our strategy for the upcoming prelims examination. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Everybody. Fine. So we'll be looking at what could have been a very good strategy, or what is the most important thing which is required for attempting the paper of prelims examination. So that exactly is our agenda of discussion today. It is not about solving any particular question. The idea is which all questions could have been skipped, or which all questions should have been done absolutely correctly because they were from standard sources. If you look at the distribution of the paper of the prelims examination of 2021, or for that matter, the questions that were asked in other previous year papers like 2020, 2019, 2018, there are few questions which are always from standard textbooks or standard sources. These are the questions which should be always answered correctly. Okay, that has to be your priority. So I'll briefly take you through the paper and the discussion for this pre-Pareekshan test, and what are the takeaways and what you can learn from the attempt that you had in this pre-Pareekshan test, right? So first, before starting the discussion, we always look at the competition that we are going to face, because this is for new people who have attempted the test for the first time, or who are going to appear in the prelims examination for the first time in the prelims of 2022. So if you look at the nature of the examination and the competition that you are going to face, you see almost 10 lakh people fill the form for the prelims examination. Out of these 10 lakh people, only 5 lakh are serious aspirants and they appear for the prelims examination. Then out of these 5 lakh people, of these people who are preparing for the examination seriously, these are not 5 lakh people. I would say serious aspirants are only 50,000 to 1 lakh aspirants, right? Out of these aspirants, about 10 to 12,000 will be shortlisted for the mains examination. we all are aware 1/3 of this will be selected for interview, and out of these 800 or 900 people will get into the final list of the civil services examination. This brings us to the cutoffs of the previous year, which we need to analyze first. So if anybody has gone through the cutoffs of the previous years, you might be knowing that in 2017 it was around 105 marks, but after that in 2018, 19 and 20, and for that matter the difficulty level of 21 also tells us that the cutoff has been low in the past 4 years. If you look at the 18's cutoff, it was 98, and it came as a shock to everybody that the cutoff is as low as 98, and even then some of these aspirants could not qualify for the prelims examination, right? If you look at the cutoff of 2019, it again hovered around 98 marks. So it was almost similar, which is less than 50%, right? To get into the list, you had to attempt 49 questions correctly after eliminating all the negative ones that you attempted in the paper. Look at the cutoff of 2020, it was just 92, which is somewhere around 46 questions in the examination. Now, what happens most of the times is we go through or we go by the attempt strategy of different people rather than devising our own strategy for the examination. And that is where majority of the aspirants do mistake. So if you look at the strategy, we have been listening to that we should attempt more number of questions. There will be people who attempt 90 questions, 85 questions, 95 questions, but that strategy sometimes is not that effective, right? So in that case, if you are properly prepared for the examination, first thing is knowledge, information gathering. Okay, not just information gathering, but processing the information properly and having a good understanding of all the subjects that are part of our syllabus. First thing that we need to do. Second thing we need to do is we need to analyze the previous year papers absolutely diligently. Okay, once you have analyzed these papers, analysis does not just mean that you solve the questions. You understand the trends. You understand the themes, which all areas are the favorite areas of UPSC, right? Once you have identified that, you prepare these sections and themes very properly. So that is second step. And the third important thing for scoring well in the prelims examination is to have a foolproof strategy for the prelims examination. That is, I will not be very adventurous while attempting the paper. I'll have a very good focus. My focus has to be on improving the accuracy in the examination. That exactly is required for the cutoffs of this level, which we are witnessing in the past 3 to 4 years. If you look at this year's paper, the cutoff still would have remained around 95 or somewhere between 90 to 100. So that does not require you to attempt more than 80 to 85 questions, right? And that is because the difficulty level of the questions is also increasing day by day. If you look at the paper, there will be 30 to 35 questions where we will have no idea. Okay, that happens most of the times in the papers. If you see the papers of 18, 19, 20 and 21, in this same was the case in the pre-pareekshan test also. You might have faced difficulty in solving all the questions, right? Some of you were not that great prepared for this test because you are still in the process of changing your track for the preparation of the prelims examination. So these are the things that we need to keep focus upon. So in this attempt, in this paper, if the cutoff in the last year's prelims examination was around 90 to 95, we suggest that if somebody has scored more than 65, has performed decently well. Of course, people who have scored more than 100, they have done absolutely well in this paper. People who have scored more than 65, if they improve from here upon, they have fair chances of crossing the cutoff mark. Okay, I'm not to say that people who have scored less than 65 mark do not have any chance. They also have chance, but from here on, if you devise your strategy properly, you improve upon your test taking skills, you improve upon your attempt skills in the examination, that will pay you more number of marks. It is not just the knowledge. Knowledge is everybody is studying the same books. Everybody is studying the same material, but it is how they are attempting the paper. That matters a lot in the real examination, right? So these are the things in front of us. Now, let us look at some scenarios where you fall in the present level and where you need to reach right now. So if you look at this particular graph that we keep on reiterating in all the pre-pareekshan tests to give you an idea exactly what is required. So if you look at the accuracy versus the attempt graph, okay, you see there are people who attempt too much in the examination, okay, and these are exceptional people. I would say they have high attempt and high accuracy in the examination. Let's say there are people who attempt around 85 questions to 90 questions in the examination. Now these people, if they have very high accuracy, they will only attempt 15 negative mark questions. Okay, so effectively they will have 65 correct questions in the examination after deducting the 1/3 negative marks. So this will be somewhere around 5 questions. And out of the remaining 70, if 5 are deducted, 65 into 2, you'll have 120 scores. So these are exceptional people. Such exceptional people will always be there in the examination. They are not our focus because they are already well equipped with the strategy for the examination, right? But then there are people who have normal attempt, but these are the people who are the most prudent and most diligent and who have consistent chances of clearing the prelims examination regularly. That is, they have a normal attempt, but at the same time, they have very high accuracy while attempting the examination. Okay, so there might be people who attempt somewhere around 75 questions, let's say. But out of these 75 questions, they only mark 13 to 14 questions incorrectly. Okay, even after having such a modest attempt, these are the people who surely qualify for the prelims examination, clearing the cutoff of the last few years. Okay, this is the region where everybody should aspire to reach. Okay, then there will be people who will have normal attempt while normal accuracy. So if anybody is attempting around 70 to 75 questions, and if such person is marking 25 to 30 questions incorrectly, definitely they are at greater loss. So idea is not to increase the attempt. If you have low accuracy, even if you increase the attempt, your accuracy will not change, right? Even then you will attempt many of the questions negatively. That should not be our approach in this particular case, right? Then there are people who have low attempt and low accuracy. If somebody is attempting 50 questions only in the paper, and even out of these 50 questions, he or she is attempting 15 negatively, they do not have any chance in the examination. Then there are people who have very high attempt. They attempt 80 questions and mark 50 questions incorrectly. So that is also a very wrong approach for the examination. Now, in this case, in the number of aspirants who fall in all these kind of spaces, if you look at these two lines, and this is this zone, this is the zone of uncertainty, where majority of us are falling presently. If you have scored more than 65 marks and you have scored less than 90 marks, you fall in this particular space, where if you improve from here upon, you can always get into this range, because we are not exceptional people. For people who are normal, for people who have basic understanding of the examination, and for people who want to remain consistent for the coming attempts as well, they need to focus on getting into this range of normal attempts with a very high accuracy rate. So that has to be our prime focus while attempting any particular test, okay? Especially the All India mock test which you are attempting, because at times we are attempting the tests of polity, we are attempting the test of history, we are attempting the test of geography. So these sectional tests are specifically designed for understanding the nature of the subject, okay? Or checking or testing your level of preparation of these subjects. But in the real examination, we face different types of questions, which are not just from any one particular paper, one particular subject, right? So we have questions from history, we have questions from geography, economy, polity, all these kind of questions are there. And at that point, you need to understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, which all questions should have been solved correctly in the examination, right? So that is the main approach that you need to understand. You need to improve upon your accuracy in the examination. That exactly is the most important thing that you need to keep in mind while attempting any mock test or even in the prelims examination. It does not have to be high accuracy with a high attempt with low accuracy. It does not have to be normal attempt with normal accuracy. It has to be optimal attempt all the time. Whenever you pick up a question of the previous years, 21, 20, 2019, 2018, you will be able to analyze that these are the 30, 40 questions which I would have surely attempted correctly. Okay, that exactly is required even while attempting a mock test. You need not bother about the most difficult question that was there in the examination. Okay, at times what happens is people come and ask us, so how would I prepare for this particular difficult question that was there in the examination? The question is not the right approach is not about solving the most difficult question in the examination. Okay, it is about solving the easier questions and the moderate questions properly. That has to be your approach. Now, if you look at this particular paper of pre-Pareekshan, there were around 100 questions. Everybody has attempted this question, and this is the distribution of level of toughness of the questions in the examination based on your attempts. Okay, so in the paper, there were 4 easy questions only. There were 14 average questions. 52 questions fell in tough category, while 30 questions were tough. What does this mean? This means that out of these very tough questions, I'm not saying these 30 questions are the same for everybody. These 30 questions will vary from person to person. For example, somebody might find economy very difficult. The other person might find history very difficult, or some people might be facing difficulty in polity. So that will depend upon your level of preparation of different subjects. But more or less in this paper, around 30 questions were very tough or fell into the very tough category. Now, what happens is when there are 30 tough questions in the paper, this means that the paper is difficult. Simple understanding or simple takeaway. Out of these very tough questions, there will be chances that you have idea about 10 questions, or out of these very tough questions, you are able to attempt 5 to 6 questions correctly. That means you will have to identify that these are the questions which I have to skip in the examination. That has to be your approach. You can't go on attempting these 30 tough questions, which will not fetch you positive marks, right? Which will fetch you only negative marks and will further drop your score in the actual examination. This brings us to a kind of scenario of how a good attempt would look like. Okay, so if you look at this particular scenario in the paper, when the level of questions was this, where we had easy, average, tough, and very tough questions, 4 easy, 14 average, 52 tough, and 30 very tough questions. Okay, so you look at this particular kind of attempt. If anybody has attempted these sections properly, so idea has to be out of the 20-25 easy questions that were there, you should mark all these questions correctly. That has to be your approach. For everybody who has attempted any paper, 20 to 25 questions are always cakewalk in the examination, be it the prelims examination, be it the All India mock test that we are conducting, or the full length test that you will take up in the prelims test series. Okay, so these 20 questions should have been marked correctly, which would have fetched you 8 marks for the easy questions, while 28 marks for the average questions, right? So this means you've already scored around 40 marks out of these easy and average questions. Look at the next section. Next section is 52 questions which were tough questions in the paper. Now in the tough section, if you have 60% accuracy rate, I am highlighting this data because you need to improve upon the accuracy. If your accuracy improves drastically in the coming attempts, in the coming mock tests, there are high chances that you will get selected in the prelims examination. So look at this particular attempt where a person has attempted 31 questions correctly out of these 52 tough questions at an accuracy rate of 60%. That means he or she has marked 21 questions incorrectly. Okay, and out of these very tough questions, if a person has 40% accuracy in these very tough questions and has marked 8 questions correctly and 12 questions incorrectly, now this is a very different scenario, because this is a scenario where the person has attempted around 90 questions. Okay, look at the not attempted questions. The not attempted questions are only 10. This means when you attempt 90 questions and you have a moderate to low accuracy, I would not say this is a low accuracy, this is also a moderate accuracy, but if you have this moderate accuracy, you will score somewhere around 90 marks. Okay, 90 to 92 marks. Now in this scenario, what happens is when you're scoring 90 to 92, you will always have this question, will I clear the prelims examination or not? Or am I at the right place in my preparation? Okay. Now let's look at a different scenario. If you look at this next scenario that we have on our hand, in this same paper, with this given level of difficulty in different sections, easy, average, tough, and very tough questions, if you improve your accuracy rate and reduce your attempts. Okay. For example, in the last case that we saw, a person had attempted all the 52 tough questions just because he or she had in mind that I have to attempt more number of questions in the examination. But picking the questions wisely, if you attempted only moderately, leaving 11 questions in this particular sections and 14 questions even in the very tough section, if you look at this particular performance where a person had 80% accuracy, he or she would have scored 66 marks in the tough section as well, plus 10 marks in the very tough question section. That is, out of the 30 questions, your target has to be, from these very tough questions, you have to just focus on getting the best you can get. That is around 7 to 8 to 10 marks, right? Statistically, things are different, but when you are really attempting the paper, things are really different. Okay. And in the average case, this portion remains the same. Now, this score will somewhere be around 108 to 112. You calculate the score. I'm not precisely telling you the score, but this is what the score would look like. And this would be the person who would be very much assured. So even after attempting only 76 questions in this case with a very high accuracy rate and marking only 14 to 15 questions incorrectly, this looks like one of the best attempts for the prelims examination. This has to be your approach also while attempting all the mock questions or the full length tests. Right? Yes, no? Getting it? Right? So this is about the attempts, number of attempts. We all the time we are listening to questions that how many questions should I attempt in the examination? So this is the approach that you need to build. If you have a tendency of marking many questions incorrectly, again look at the manner in which you are attempting the questions. Okay, look at the number, look at the questions. For example, Rohan said, sir, I scored 50 marks, but you will have to analyze which all sections were doable in the paper. You should have focused on these rather than focusing on the most difficult questions in the paper. Even after skipping, let's say 25 questions in this particular scenario on your screen, you could have scored more than 100 marks. Okay, I'm not saying you will only mark in the negative part. If you look at the wrong questions, you'll not mark just 14 questions negatively. You might answer almost 17 to 18 questions negatively, but the other questions that you attempt, 60 to 62 questions, have to be marked really, really correctly, right? So that has to be your approach. And given the level of cutoffs that we are witnessing these days, 92, 95, 98, so this looks like a really good attempt in a very tough questions. If God forbid the paper comes out to be easy in the examination, you yourself will feel that paper is easy. In that case, your attempt will normally increase. Okay, but you do not have to go with a premeditated mindset that I will attempt more number of questions all the time. You choose the questions based on the difficulty level in the examination, right? That has to be a very practical and simple approach for the prelims examination. Okay. Then we had different subjects in the paper. If you have opened your e-learn performance analysis, you might have found that the questions have been divided into different sections: polity, history, geography, environment, economy, and science and technology. Okay, even in these sections, we have highlighted which all questions were tough, very tough, easy, and average. Now, these questions were not tough because we marked them as tough. It is all based on your attempt in the examination, right? So if you look at the polity section, in the polity section, there were around 20 questions, which means out of these 20 questions and based on your attempt, there were around 4 very tough questions. Okay. Look at these questions which were tough, average, and easy. These questions are somewhere around 16 questions in the examination. So your target should have been to increase your attempts in these sections. Plus, you should have improved upon your accuracy in this particular section. In these 16 to 17 questions should have been very, very good. Somewhere around 80%, 70% would have been a very good accuracy in all the sections, right? Similar is the case with geography. You look at this distribution, we had 13 questions in the geography. Now, geography is not very difficult at times in the examination. Even if you look at the previous question papers, if you have prepared all the sections and if you have focused on all the types of questions that have been asked, let's say the questions are being asked related to tributaries of the rivers. Let's say the questions are being asked about important geographical features or geographical phenomena. All these are part of our NCRTs. Plus, you can always do your mapping part, right? So in this particular section, if there were 13 questions, only 2 questions were very tough. This means that even in this case, around 10 to 11 questions were doable. So 16 plus 10, around 26 questions in just 2 sections, which had a weightage of just 33 questions, isn't it? Plus, the good thing about both these sections is these are very predictable. For example, polity, you have to prepare it just from one source, that is Lakshmikant. Plus, you supplement it with the Prelims Compass magazine. That's an additional thing. Okay. So where the sources are defined, sources are pretty predictable, it becomes really easy to prepare these sections. For the most uncertain parts, like let's say environment remains one of the most uncertain part in the examination. Even if you pick up the last 4 years papers, and if you ask me, sir, what is one source that I need to refer to solve these questions? There is no one source. You'll always have to multiply your sources. But keep in mind, we do not have to top in this examination. Our approach is just to clear the cutoff of the prelims examination, because the score will not be counted in your final merit list. The focus should be on focusing on those subjects which have predictable sources, and in those sections where the questions are relatively easy and from the most standard sources. Look at the other sections. If you look at history, there were around 17 questions, and in history there were 7 very tough questions. Plus, there were around 10 questions which fell in tough to average category. Now, what Rohan was saying, he attempted 17 questions, out of which 7 were very tough. He could have easily skipped these 7 questions in the examination. And out of these remaining 10 questions, from the most predictable questions like the civil disobedience movement, the Khilafat movement, the books that have been written on 1857 revolt, all these questions should have been prepared. If you have not prepared them well, that shows that your preparation is not on the right track. Okay, so that has to be one thing that you need to focus. If the question is on very standard events in the modern history, this question should have been attempted properly, or maybe you did not read the question properly. Okay, there were minor things that had to be noticed while solving these questions. We'll look at some of the questions in this part. Same is the case with economy, where economy questions were around 19 questions, and in this portion there were 6 very tough questions, and 11 to around 13 questions were on tough to average side. So these questions could have also been done properly. Fine. Even in the economy section in the real examination, if you prepare the economy from proper sources, that's your NCRT and the classes, revision classes, plus the main prelims compass magazine, this year, out of the 17 to 16 questions, any person would have attempted 13 to 14 questions correctly if he or she had prepared these portions properly from the prelims compass and our revision classes. So that is the idea, that you focus on these things properly from the most standard sources. You need not run after sources here and there every time. Okay, that is one thing that you need to keep in mind. Same is the case with environment, ecology, and disaster management. This remains the tough section. This will always remain the tough section, both these environment and science and text. So these are the 30 very tough questions in the paper that I was talking about. Out of these 30 tough questions, if you find out of these 30 questions from both these sections, the environment and the science and technology, always there will be 10 to 12 very, very doable questions in the paper. So you have to focus on these doable questions, not on the most difficult ones, because that will not give you any extra marks for attempting the tough questions in the paper. Okay, the weightage of all the questions is the same. Fine. So let us look at the distribution. Distribution of the paper of prelims examination of 2021 was around 22 questions were from history, 17 from polity, 16 from economy, 17 from environment, 8 from geography, 9 from science and tech. There were 4 questions from agriculture, and there were miscellaneous current affairs. Okay. If you look at the distribution of the previous year's papers, the distribution remains more or less the same. The only thing that changed this year was that UPSC reduced the number of questions in the economy. And that is why the people were facing a bit more difficulty in solving these questions. Plus, there were few unpredictable questions based on the sports events and all these things. Okay, but that was just an exception. That is not the rule. It is not that you start preparing all the awards and types and the sports that are there in the news regularly, right? Because that should never be your focus. Even in this particular paper, in this year's paper, where we had these 7 miscellaneous current affair questions and all these things, if you had prepared the history section properly, the polity section properly, and the economy section properly, look at the weightage of all these 3. It's around 52 questions. Plus, there were 8 questions geography, 60. Okay, and out of the remaining questions, you could have solved 10 to 12 questions, 12 to 13 questions. Okay, and if in case the cutoff remains 92 this year, this will be the same approach that you have to keep while attempting the paper. Okay, or if somebody had focused on accuracy and focused on basic subjects, he or she could have scored really well in the examination. Fine. So this was the distribution. Look at the distribution of Pre-Pareekshan 2 test. Similar was the distribution. 1 or 2 questions here and there that UPSC also keeps on doing. It keeps on changing the weightage of different subjects. For example, at one point in 2016, there were only 4 to 5 questions from the polity. But the next year in 2017, there were around 22 questions on the polity. If you look at last year there were 17 questions on the polity, right? So the weightage keeps on changing here and there. Fine. So history had 17% weightage, that is 17 questions, polity 20 questions, economy around 19 questions, because this year the weightage of the economy was 16 and a year before the weightage was around 24 to 25. So we kept it somewhere between both these figures, and that is why it was around 19. There were geography questions which were around 13, environment, ecology, that was around 21, and this section these 2 sections made the paper a bit on difficult side for everybody to attempt. Okay, fine. Plus there were some difficult questions in the history. So this was the distribution. Now this brings us to next important thing for the preparation. Now, how do you analyze the previous year question papers properly? Okay, how to decode or break the difficult sections into some themes which can be prepared properly for the examination. Okay. So if you analyze the previous year papers, you pick up different sections. Let's say you pick up the science and technology section, which is on your screen. You got to analyze what are these important themes which UPSC is focusing upon. If you look at these questions and analyze the science and technology questions, you will find that the questions that have been asked by UPSC are based on emerging technologies that are in news. We see questions related to nanotechnology. We see questions related to blockchain. We saw a question in 2020 related to artificial intelligence. An year before, there was question on 3D printing, right? Visible light. Even in the mains examination, there was question related to light emitting diode or LED. So these are the portions which need to be prepared properly. If you prepare most of these emerging technologies, or there was a question related to Internet of the Things, right? So first thing is you focus on emerging technologies. You look at the famous technologies that we sometimes keep on listening in the news. So we had a question related to GPS technology, virtual reality, drone, Internet of Things. Are these any different? These are the things that we are listening every day in the news, okay? Or even some of us are using these technologies. So at least we should have this curiosity of understanding what exactly is the mechanism behind this. That is what UPSC is also checking. It does not require you to understand the exact way in which GPS works, just the basic idea or basic principles on which this particular technology is working. Then you look at the other parts, important developments in genetics. Questions have been asked related to BT cotton. This year also we had a question related to the ball guard pest of BT cotton, okay? Year before we had questions related to CRISPR-Cas9, all these related to developments in genetics. So these are the important topics that you need to focus on. Then look at the space technology. Questions have regularly been asked related to space related developments. We had questions on Mars mission. We had question on AstroSat. We had questions on NASA's important missions, right? So this is how you analyze the previous year papers. Look at any path-breaking scientific discovery that has taken place in the last year. So gravitational waves were detected in 2019. A question was asked in the prelims examination. You look at the CRISPR-Cas9 technology. Continuously for 2 years, questions were asked from this particular thing. So previous year questions, analyzing the important themes and then preparing these themes properly, okay? And looking for other important technologies or things that are in news which fall in these themes become really important. Fine, got it? This is the case with science and technology. I've taken science and technology first because it happens to be one of the most difficult section for almost all the students. That is why in this particular difficult section, when there are 8 to 9 or 10 questions in science and technology, you could have solved 3 to 4 questions if you prepared them properly. Fine. I'm not saying after doing all this effort, you'll be able to solve the 10 questions. The idea is not to solve the 10 questions, but the focus has to be on if a simple question comes up from this particular section, at least we should be able to answer that question properly. Then look at the environment section. Divide environment section into different parts. This happens to be, again, one of the most difficult sections, right? Even in this section, if you prepare all these parts or all these themes that UPSC has focused its questions upon, you focus upon national parks, biosphere reserves, wetlands, tiger reserves, all these, plus you get into details of these national parks also at times, because UPSC has this habit of asking questions from inside these national parks, or what all constitute these national parks, important species that are found, right? Or kind of flora, fauna that is found in these national parks. That's a favorite area of UPSC. So you prepare these things in detail, then focus on important species, the endangered, critically endangered, all these, plus important theoretical concepts. UPSC has been asking questions on these important concepts. So these are the themes in the environment section. I'm not getting into the details of these sections, but this is how you analyze. Okay, I'll share the PPT at the end of this class so that you can always go through these themes that we have analyzed for you. Fine. Plus you also do this analysis. Keep on doing this analysis regularly whenever you're seeing the previous year questions. So any national initiative, international initiative, acts and rules like the Wildlife Protection Act, the Forest Conservation Act, Environment Protection Act, all these acts should be done properly. And any important environmental concern that India faces, questions have been asked based on sand mining, stubble burning, air quality, solid waste management, all these things. Fine. And this is the basis on which we formulate our paper for the pre-Pareekshan test. Fine. Now, similar is the case with history. Even in history, you can analyze some of the themes. Some things in the history are must do. For example, in the modern history, you cannot skip the important movements that took place in the history. For example, the non-cooperation movement, the civil disobedience movement, the Swadeshi movement, Quit India movement. But now the UPSC is asking finer details of these questions, not just a cursory idea about these events that happened in modern history. What was the question last year related to the movements? The question was related to Quit India movement, and we were asked the date of the launch of that particular movement. So now these things are also being asked by UPSC. So we can't do anything about it. We will have to learn all the aspects of these particular important movements on which questions have been regularly asked in the modern history. Then Charter Acts is one of the favorite areas of UPSC. It has been asking questions on the Charter Act of 1830, Charter Act of Regulating Act of 1776, or the Morlaminto reforms, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, all these reforms, right? Plus, British Indian administration and the East Indian Company's policies in India before 1857 and after 1857, all these things have to be prepared properly. So constitutional administrative developments, this is because we still have a colonial legacy in different administrative departments, or the laws that are governing the administration in India, they are based on the British administration, right? So that is why we keep on learning the constitutional and administrative development. So there are particular themes in the modern history. For example, education development, development of press in India, right? The impact, economic impact of the British policies, or what were the economic policies of the British government. All these things, the chapters have been divided in this manner only in the standard textbooks like the Spectrum or let's say Bipan Chandra. So you focus on all these aspects. Plus, personalities is also one of the favorite areas. Every year UPSC keeps on asking the questions. And this year we had the question on songs from the prison that was related to Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. So analyzing themes is important. We have already highlighted them. Then in the ancient and medieval part, where majority of us are facing problems, these are the themes which we have analyzed based on our understanding of the previous year questions and the focus areas of UPSC. So any ancient city or port, important scholars or exponents of Indian philosophies. These are the questions that are regularly being asked. You prepare them exhaustively from the basic textbooks, the NCRTs, plus also from the Prelims Compass, where we are providing you additional material based on these topics. Ancient foreign travelers, their observations about India. You look at these Buddhism and Jainism, these are the favorite areas of UPSC. Every year a question has been asked on these themes, except the last year. Then we have important terms that are used in ancient and medieval kingdoms. Okay. For example, there was a question related to Vishti labor, which is forced labor, right? So we had this question. Then in the last year, we had question related to Mughal administration, the Subha, Sarkar, Pargana, all these things, right? So these are the terms which are important. If you're not learning these terms, nobody can help you, right? Focus has to be on learning all these things, and based on these themes, you prepare the portion properly. First, you understand the thing, understand the subject, read the basic textbooks, analyze these themes, and again, go back to these books to understand these important aspects for the examination. So architecture is important, Bhakti and Sufi movements are important, art and culture, we have these paintings, crafts, music, dance forms, all these things. Got it? Then geography has physical geography, Indian physical geography, mapping. In mapping, you focus on rivers, Indian, international, mountains, physical features, all these things. You attach geography, you correlate geography with the environment portion in terms of national parks, biodiversity, biosphere reserves, the wildlife sanctuaries, all these things, where they are located, which river is passing through these important wildlife sanctuaries or national parks, plus any strategically important location. Fine. For example, we had a question on Siachen Glacier and its location. Where is it located? So that was the question that was asked by UPSC. So strategically important locations. You can be asked questions about Black Sea, which is in news because of the Ukrainian issue. Okay. So that is how you prepare geography. Then there are international locations and international affairs related questions in the examination. So questions can be asked related to places in news. These are based generally from the conflict zones or civil war related locations. Then we have the international conventions, agreements which are in news. For example, any arms agreement. We had questions directly on IAEA, International Atomic Energy related questions. Then we have international groupings and meets that keep on taking place. This year we had a question in the mains examination from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So that means we also have to prepare SCO and all these organizations agreements from the prelims perspective also. Fine. Plus there are these different things that you need to focus upon, like the important terms. For example, the question was asked on third. So this is how you analyze the previous year questions. You understand the type of questions that have been asked, and then accordingly focus your preparation based on these themes. That will make the difficult sections a bit more easier to handle. At least you will have an idea of what exactly is to be focused upon before the prelims examination. Fine. This brings us to few questions which you could have solved properly in the examination, and why these questions should have been solved, or what should have been your approach while studying for the examination. So we had this question in the prelims examination. This question was related to alternative dispute resolution mechanism. The question was about the definition of the arbitration, or what exactly the arbitration looks like. Look at the accuracy rate in this particular question. It was around 22% only. This means this was a difficult question in the examination. Now, although it was a difficult question, but for somebody who is preparing for the examination seriously, should have learned about the alternative dispute resolution properly, because at times we have seen questions related to Lok Adalat, Gram Nyayalayas, all these things, right? So based on that theme, we devised this particular question. Plus, this was also in the news in the current affairs, because a mediation bill has been introduced in the parliament. Fine. So based on the last arbitration bill, this was just a definitional question. Fine. And what happened, what was done in this question? If you did not know the definition of what is mediation, what is conciliation, what is arbitration, you would have definitely marked this question incorrectly. That is why this low accuracy rate is there. People went on just speculating that this would be correct, this would be incorrect based on their common understanding. But such specific questions require an understanding of the basic definitions. If you have not prepared it, you should have skipped this question in the examination. Now, what was done was that in this, the role of the mediator and the conciliator was interchanged in the statement 2 and 3. Right? So what is the role of conciliator was replaced with the role of mediator, while what is the role of mediator was replaced with the role of conciliator in both these statements. Okay, if you look at mediation, it happens when the parties are brought together. The mediator just sits there and understand and makes these parties arrive at a consensus, and then awards a final judgment on that particular thing. But what conciliator does is he or she also proposes certain solutions to the issue that is ongoing between the two. Okay, that is why the only one statement is correct, because that is just the basic definition of what mediator does, what a conciliator does. You have looked at the explanation in this question, right? So that is why, and I wanted to show this question because this was a very specific question. If you did not know about this, it was not testing your general understanding of what alternative dispute resolution is. That is what made this question a bit difficult one. Look at the next question. It was a very conceptual question in polity. In polity, conceptual questions keep on coming. If you do not have much idea about the conceptual, if you do not have conceptual clarity, these questions will sound difficult in the examination. So what was this question related to? Which of the following principles best describe the legislative relations between center and the state in India? Fine. So in this, if you look at the other three options, these options look as if the states are mere satellites to the center. Okay, or the states are dependent on the center, but that exactly is not the case. Okay, it is not that the center has delegated some of its duties on the center, right? That is why the first statement is incorrect. It is not as if the center is supreme over the states. That center can legislate on any subject that is there on the state subject at all the points of time. There are certain exceptions when the state can, of course, legislate, but it is not all the time. That is why supremacy is also wrong. Fine. And that is why this principle of subsidiarity has been introduced as far as the legislative relations between the center and the state is concerned. That is why we have two separate lists, the spheres of governance, the spheres on which the central legislature and the state legislature can legislate have been clearly divided in the constitution itself. So that is what is the larger understanding of the term. Now, this question was devised based on the understanding of the previous questions. We have been asked questions on concepts like liberty, equality. That is why this was regarding the federal nature of the Indian Constitution. Fine. Then look at this question. Now, this question also had just 41% accuracy rate, but this was a pretty straightforward question from the standard sources. If you have marked this question incorrectly, you again need to understand or go through the Lakshmikant properly, because there was nothing difficult in this particular question, right? What was so difficult in this question? Look at the first statement. An ordinance cannot be promulgated for the matters related to money bill. Why not? It can be promulgated. It cannot be promulgated just for the constitutional amendments, because ordinances are of the nature of a law passed by the parliament. Plus, money bill is also passes through the legislative process in the Lok Sabha. It is introduced in the Lok Sabha, right? That is why even an ordinance can be passed on money bills. That is why this first statement is wrong, because the question has been asked in a negative format. Fine. Then second statement, yes, it has to be laid before the parliaments, before both the houses of the parliament when they reassemble, because it cannot go on for more than 6 months or so. Fine. If you look at the third statement, it is a discretionary power of the president. No, it is not a discretionary power of the president, because president acts and acts upon the advice of the council of the ministers or the cabinet. So that is why it is not a discretionary power. One day president cannot come and pass an ordinance. It has to be based on the advice that has been given by the council of the minister. Okay, fine. So that is why this question required conceptual clarity. If you mark this question incorrectly, introspect upon your understanding of the basic concepts in the Indian polity. Fine. Then look at this question. This question is related to fundamental rights. Every year we have a question in the prelims examination based on the fundamental rights. Every year we have a question related to fundamental duty. Regularly, we have been asked questions related to directive principles of the state policy. What does that mean? That means we have to focus on minor and finer details of all these three sections in the polity. That is favorite area of UPSC. We also prepare that comprehensively. If you look at this particular question, now the other type of rights that have been given here, for example, right to marriage, sexual identity, right to privacy, these have been brought out by interpretation of the Supreme Court. They have not been explicitly included in the fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution. That is why this question was asked. So reading all the articles related to these fundamental rights, your fundamental duties and the DPSPs would have helped you in solving this particular question. Plus, this was also based on your basic understanding of Lakshmikant and your Indian polity. Okay. Then look at the directive principles of the state policy. Even in this, only 33% people could mark it correctly. This means that even in DPSPs, you have to understand all the important articles related to DPSP. What are the provisions that have been provided there? Because that is the area in which UPSC has been asking questions. In 2017, there was a question that which DPSP was added by 42nd Constitution Amendment Act. What does that mean? That means you have to learn all the articles related to DPSP. What are the subjects of all these articles? What are the amendments that have been done in which particular year? Okay. That would have helped you in solving this question. So if you look at this particular thing, we do not have securing development of indigenous technology as one of the DPSPs. Plus tribal development is also not a part of that particular thing. Just pick up your Lakshmikant, you'll understand this thing. The idea to take up this question was that this question should have been marked correctly. All these questions, like the DPSP related question, the question related to fundamental rights, the question related to ordinance, they are all part of your basic understanding of the polity. If you have marked these questions incorrectly, go back to your basic books, learn about these things properly. Okay. Plus, you cannot mark these questions incorrectly in the examination. Otherwise, your chances of clearing the prelims will reduce because of the even when you are not able to attempt these easy or straightforward questions from your particular sections. Okay, look at this. This was again a question regarding the nature of the fundamental rights. Okay, in this, the question, the accuracy again stood at around 43% only. Plus, many would have understood the question wrongly, because the question required us to identify the incorrect statements and not the correct ones. So reading the question carefully also becomes important here. Fine. So look at the three statements. First statement is all fundamental rights are qualified in nature. Not all are qualified. Some are qualified. For example, there are reasonable restrictions on Article 19. But there are other rights which are absolute in nature. For example, there cannot be any qualification on right against untouchability. Okay. There cannot be any qualification against forced labor. So these are some absolute rights. Fine. Look at the second statement. Fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution are available to citizens only. No. Some of the rights are available to foreigners also. Not all of them, but few of them are available to foreigners also. Look at the third statement. They are defended and protected by the Supreme Court only. Only was the key word here. They are also protected by the high courts. Article 226. Fine. Because the writ jurisdiction of the high court can also be used for fundamental rights. Fine. Then, looking at the questions of geography, even in geography, I have highlighted the basic understanding of the textbooks, NCRTs, and the type of questions, and preparing these questions properly was really important for solving the questions will always remain important for solving the question in the prelims examination. Look at this question. Which of the following are essential conditions for essential conditions of the ideal source region of air mass? Okay. Now, if you have studied this in your NCRT, even in this question, the accuracy rate was only 35%. But if you look at the conditions which are required for the formation of the air masses, the first is there must be extensive and homogeneous Earth's surface. And that is provided by oceans at times. So majority of the air masses are produced over oceans. Then the second is there should be convergence of the air. Now, convergence of air, where does it happen? It happens when cyclonic conditions are there. Convergence happens in case of cyclones, right? So this is of course incorrect, because air mass always has homogeneous temperature conditions and things like that. But that does not happen when the convergence is taking place. That is why convergence was wrong. If you eliminate this statement, you could have easily eliminated the three statements. First is correct. So apply your logic in the examination. Have presence of mind in the examination based on the understanding that you have. Okay. This was not expected that in this particular question you have marked this question incorrectly, majority of you, with only 35% accuracy. Just a basic understanding of the NCRT and applying presence of mind in the examination would have made it easy for you to solve the questions. Look at this questions. Look at this question. This question had only 14% accuracy in the examination. Now, this question is related to Indus Valley civilization and its sites. Regularly, questions have been asked on this particular aspect. Okay, this forms one of the important sections for us in the history, especially in the ancient history. Now, looking at the statements, if you had studied this section, the only thing that you had to notice while solving this question was the second statement. That is, the bead industry was discovered at Chunhadaro and Kalibangan, which was not the case. It was found at Lothal. Okay. And if you identified that this is the wrong statement, eliminate and get the answer. Simple. So reading questions carefully and understanding that whatever you have learned, you apply that and use this logic of elimination also at times. It also helps in the examination. Then look at this particular question. This question was from Chola Empire, basic books, but it did not require any real understanding of the Chola Empire also. You could have applied your common sense or presence of mind in this question. Look at the first statement. The Council of Ministers had the real powers over and above the king. How can this happen in case of ancient or medieval India? It does not happen even now. Okay. So first statement is incorrect. Eliminate B and D. Then the governors of the provinces were selected from the local people through election. That does not happen. That did not happen in Chola Empire, because the governors were appointed by the king. And this was the practice all over India, because that was the basic idea of feudalism. Fine. So eliminate this third statement. So only our option that we are left with is 2 and 4. Okay. Then again, I have highlighted that questions are always asked related to terms that are there in ancient and medieval history. So we had this particular question. So of course, the terms had to be prepared properly. So whenever you are studying ancient or medieval history, keep it in mind, make it a point that you learn about all these things. I've already highlighted that a question was asked related to Vishti labor. The question was asked related to Subha Sarkar and their order. So this is the case. So that is why these questions have to be prepared. A question was also asked about important positions in the administration during the Mughal period. Prepare them properly. Okay. Then in the history part, again, modern history, Wavell plan was asked. Fine. So minor details and finer details of everything that happened in modern history is important, because UPSC is now getting in finer details of these events that happened in the modern history. Look at this question. The Wavell plan. Wavell plan came during the Second World War, right? Okay, when the constitution formation was going on. So it sought to resolve the political deadlock by setting up an executive council, wholly Indian, to run an interim government. Now, normally this statement is sometimes seen in the books related to Wavell plan. But what happens is it did not talk about everything in India. The viceroy still kept some of the powers with him. Right? That is why it did not apply to every aspect, or it was not comprised of all Indians at that time, right? So the Governor General also had certain powers, and that is why this statement was a misnomer, which is sometimes used. But the other two are correct. Identify the first wrong and eliminate the statements, get the right answer. Then I have talked about 1857 war, the causes, the results or consequences of this war, the books that have been written. This is a very standard thing that you prepare from the history section. You should have answered this properly and understood the basics of the number of books that have been written on the revolt of 1857. So first is written by Karl Marx, and the third is written by Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. Fine. These things were interchanged here. Again, UPSC has been asking dates. Now dates are important. So in support of the Khilafat movement, Mahatma Gandhi inaugurated non-cooperation campaign on 1st September. No, this was not the case. It was inaugurated on 1st of August. First statement is wrong. First statement wrong. C and D are incorrect. Okay. But the third statement is that during the non-cooperation movement, Khilafat committee called for boycott of British courts. Now, this was not the case. It only talked about resignation from the civil services under the government. Again, finer detail of what happened during the Khilafat movement was required to solve this question. Question was from the very standard movement that happened in modern history. It was not a very obscure question, but reading it in depth, understanding, and then applying this thing in the examination. Then civil disobedience movement. The questions are all standard in nature. These are questions that have been prepared from standard textbooks, NCRT, Bipan Chandra, Spectrum, all these things. But even here, some of the people have marked these questions incorrectly. So look at the second statement here. During the movement, the Gadwali regiment refused to fire on the unarmed crowd in Calcutta. No, it was not the case, because it is related to Khudai Khidmatgar in Peshawar. Okay, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and everything that we read. So if you identified this wrong statement, eliminate. A is the answer, 1 and 3. So this has to be your approach. The idea is not to let you the answers of this. Idea is not to teach civil disobedience movement. Idea is not to teach you Khilafat movement. But idea is whatever you have studied, if you are not going to apply it properly, that will be a bit problematic for you in the examination. So keep on focusing on this thing, the kind of silly mistakes that you have done in the examination. Right? Then the environment related questions, there was pretty basic questions from the NCRTs and basic understanding of the events and the phenomena in the environment. Look at this question. Which of the following statements is or are correct about the phosphorus cycle? First is the phosphorus is released into the atmosphere during this cycle. But this phosphorus cycle is not a gaseous cycle. It is a sedimentary cycle. Gaseous cycle are nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, right? So this is just a basic definitional thing about the biogeochemical cycles that happen in the atmosphere. First statement is of course incorrect. Second is just the sources of the phosphorus in this particular cycle. Then look at this thing. This question has been formulated from your NCRT. This is not a very difficult question. Okay. Accuracy rate is just 15%. This means that majority of us have not read the NCRTs properly. Look at the basic things that have been given in the NCRT. Every line that is given in the NCRT is important. Look at the case. In this case, female mosquitoes are not parasites. Parasites are the one who are detrimental to the host, plus they derive their food from the host. Okay. But female mosquitoes are just vectors, and the plasmodium that they implant into our blood is the one which is the actual parasite. So that's just basic understanding. Plus this is given in your NCRT also. So you should have prepared it properly. Then again, related to biodiversity, this question was also from the NCRT. Again, look at the accuracy rate, just 36%. And you can't blame environment is difficult. That means the basic sources have not been referred to properly. Fine. If you look at the diversity section, there's a diagram which has been drawn in the NCRT of class 11th, of class 12th of biology. In the ecology section, a pie chart has been given. In this, the relative diversity of the animal and the plant kingdom is given. What are the types of diversity in case of animal kingdom have also been provided properly. So if you look at that thing, the plants have the highest number of the species on the earth. No, this is not the case. It is the insects, the animals, which have the highest biodiversity on the earth. Look at this, vertebrates have the highest number of species within the animals. This is again not the case, because invertebrates, which are the insects, which comprise around 70% of the species that are there in the animal kingdom. So again, this was a question from NCRT. So again, highlighting that basic things, basic sources are the best friends for everybody who is preparing for the examination. Okay. Then again, this question, Green Grids Initiative. Now, this question was also asked in your mains examination. Even in this question, the accuracy rate is just 30%. Fine. Look at this. It is an initiative of India and France. No, it is not an initiative of India and France. It is an initiative of UK. Second statement, yes, it is correct. It was announced at Conference of Parties 26, that is Glasgow Summit. Third statement is fine. It is implemented by ISA. State answer is 2 and 3. Question was asked in your mains examination. Again, look at this, the kind of air pollutants that are included in the WHO's air quality guidelines. Here, 6 pollutants have been mentioned, which include the particulate matter 2.5 and 10, ozone, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, carbon monoxide. Now, these are factual questions, but somebody who is preparing seriously has to prepare all these things, right? So, benzene was not included here. That is why you eliminate benzene and you get the answer. Then this was related to laws in the environment. I've highlighted that laws also constitute important area of preparation in the as far as environment is concerned. This is related to the tiger conservation foundations, which are part of the Wildlife Protection Act. Okay, here the catch was that as per the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, the tiger conservation foundations are established not by the central government but by the state governments. Fine. Second is correct. And third is that the TCFs have been constituted for all tiger reserves in the country, which was not the case. Got it? Many of you might not have prepared these sections properly, but my idea is to highlight that these are the things that you need to focus upon while preparing. All these details, all these themes, at least you should have done these things properly. So these 20 odd questions that we have discussed could have been marked correctly in the examination, isn't it? Many of you would have marked these questions also incorrectly. I'm not talking about the most difficult ones, which nobody had an idea about, but these were from standard topics that we regularly hear about. For example, the civil disobedience, non-cooperation movement, all these things, right? Then again, coking coal related question. Now, this question has been asked by UPSC. A similar question has been asked by UPSC in the previous years also. Here, the accuracy rate was only 20%, around 18 to 19%. If you look at the quality of the coal that is produced in India, of course, we listen to it in the NCRTs of the class 11th related to minerals that India has a very high ash content in the coal. And the high quality coking coal, which is required for the production of steel, is not produced domestically. That is why we have to import. Second statement is incorrect. Coking coal is mainly used in steel production in both blast furnace and the electric arc method. However, the electric arc method does not require the use of coal. It was wrong. Question was a bit tricky. The formulation of the question was a bit tricky, but this is one thing. This is based on the theme that you analyzed from the previous years. Fine. Then Gaganyaan project. Again, apply your logic in this question. First statement is the Gaganyaan program envisages undertaking the demonstration of human spaceflight to geostationary orbit. Now, geostationary orbits are very far off. Majority of the International Space Station or the astronauts that go into the space visit the low Earth orbit. Okay. So presence of mind is really required in the examination, plus analyzing the themes, understanding the syllabus, and preparing these themes diligently, referring to standard sources properly, and studying, of course. That's required, okay? You can't skip the studying part. Just focusing on the strategy will not help. Keep studying more, focus on all the subjects, revise multiple times, and understand these things. Keep taking tests so that you understand these finer details that you missed out on this thing in the paper. Fine. So these are the things that I had to discuss related to all the subjects that were there, the type of questions that were asked. And the idea of demonstrating these 20 questions was about highlighting that these were some straightforward questions from the standard sources, which could have been marked correctly in the examination. After this, Baswa sir will take you through the economic questions. And at the end of the discussion, we'll take up your questions or queries or any issue that you're facing in your preparation. Fine?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Yes. So how did you find the questions from the Indian economy? Tough or easy? Average. Rohan says it's average. Okay. What about others? We have the results with you. We have your results. I have gone through the most of your marks. Moderate. Okay. What about others? Tough. Okay, fine. Average. Fed tapering questions unexpected. Okay. Medium to difficult. Okay. ठीक है. Fine. So let's take up the questions from the Indian economy, which have appeared in the pre-Pareekshan test. So before that, let's understand the overall preparation strategy as far as Indian economy is concerned, as to how should you prepare for the Indian economy for the upcoming prelims examination. So if you look at the syllabus, as mentioned by UPSC, the syllabus is economic and social development, which includes sustainable development, poverty, inclusion, demographics, social sector initiatives, etc. So if you can break down this entire syllabus into chapters, you would have approximately around 20 to 25 chapters as seen on the screen. Some of the chapters include the Reserve Bank of India, structure of banking, monetary policy, financial inclusion, taxation system in India, balance of payment, international institutions, then government schemes and policies, and some core concepts. So if I can arrange these 20 to 25 chapters into separate pillars, you would have around 6 pillars in the Indian economy. These 6 pillars are banking and finance, public finance, external sector, international institutions, government initiatives, policies, and the core concepts. Now, if you look at the relative weightage of the different pillars as far as your Indian economy is concerned, you can easily see the pillar that gets the maximum weightage is the banking and finance. So as you can see, every year, at least around 5 to 8 questions have been asked from this pillar. For example, last year's prelims examination, we had almost 17 questions from the Indian economy. Out of those 17 questions, you can see 8 questions were from the theme of banking and finance. So this happens to be the most important theme. This is in turn followed by the theme of external sector and the theme of taxation. So these are the 3 most important themes as far as your Indian economy is concerned. So while preparing for the upcoming prelims examination, please do give more amount of importance or weightage to these 3 themes. But at the same time, it does not mean that you can afford to neglect the other pillars also, because from the other pillars, usually 1 or 2 questions are normally asked every year. And the other pillars as such, they are comparatively very easier also. So this is how you should start your preparation. The question is what you should be doing in the next 100 days. So normally we keep telling the students that the last 100 days before the prelims examination, this is the most important part. This is where you'll get to know whether you're going to clear the prelims or not. So how you're going to put your efforts in the last 100 days, that is going to matter a lot. That's the most important thing. You are studied throughout the year, but what you're going to do in the last 100 days before the prelims is extremely, extremely important. So what you should do in the last 100 days as far as Indian economy is concerned, how should you approach Indian economy? First and foremost, please go through and revise all the NCERT textbooks related to Indian economy. I hope most of you have already gone through the NCERT textbooks. In case if you have not gone through the NCERT textbooks so far, go through the NCERT textbooks, revise the NCERT textbooks thoroughly. That's the first thing. Second thing is, revise your class notes, whatever you have studied so far, from whatever sources you have studied Indian economy so far. So revise everything. So NCERT plus your class notes. That will build your foundation. Okay, I'm not saying that this is sufficient, but I'm just saying that this is going to build the foundation which is needed to attempt the questions in the upcoming prelims examination. On this foundation, you need to do a certain value addition in the next 100 days. What kind of value addition should you do? First and foremost, I hope all of you must be knowing that government has recently released budget and economic survey, right? So budget and economic survey, they do become important for your prelims examination as well. So as far as budget and economic survey is concerned, I have already conducted 2 sessions of budget, part 1 and part 2. It's already uploaded on the YouTube. So in case if you have not watched the budget sessions, go through the budget, understand the important aspects. Apart from that, in next week, that is coming Sunday, I will be conducting a session on the economic survey. So budget and economic survey will be done through the videos. So that's the first thing as far as value addition is concerned. Apart from that, we will also be soon releasing the Prelims Compass 2022 for the Indian economy. So this Prelims Compass, hopefully we should be able to release it by the 3rd or 4th week of March. And once the Prelims Compass is released, this Prelims Compass will have all the core aspects as well as current affairs related developments as far as Indian economy is concerned. So this will help you to do a value addition to a preparation. So this is the second part. The third part is, we as part of the quality improvement program, QIP, we will be conducting the revision classes. So in these revision classes, we will be revising the entire length and breadth of the syllabus, both from the core part of syllabus as well as the current affairs related developments in the Indian economy in the last 1 to 1.5 years. So everything will be revising as part of these revision classes. So if you are able to do these things, that's more than sufficient. Apart from that, keep attempting the pre-pareekshan test. Further, in case if you have not attempted the previous pre-pareekshan test, go through the previous pre-pareekshan test questions and try to keep on doing a value addition. So this should be your approach as far as the next 100 days for the upcoming prelims examination is concerned. Apart from that, I just want to make one thing very clear. Most of the students have this perception that economy is tough. Please remove this perception. If you are studying Indian economy with this flawed perception that economy is tough, it is indeed going to become tough for you. So just remove this perception, flawed perception, start believing in yourself, start understanding the concepts related to economy, and let me assure you, it is going to become a cakewalk. Okay. So this is what you must do in the next 100 days as far as Indian economy is concerned. Now let's take up some important questions from the pre-pareekshan test. So this is the report as far as Indian economy is concerned. As you can see, we had asked 19 questions from the Indian economy. So totally we had 38 marks from Indian economy in the pre-pareekshan test. And I hope all of you are able to see this average marks of the students in the Indian economy. It is extremely lower. The average marks is just 5.25 out of 38. The reason why the average marks is lower is predominantly because of the fact that students have found most of the questions to be either very tough or tough. So you can see very tough questions 6, tough questions 11, 11 plus 6. So these are the number of questions which students found to be tough, and only 2 questions they found it to be of average difficulty. So in the last year prelims examination, we had 17 questions from the Indian economy, and on similar pattern, we had 19 questions in our test as well. So let's take up the discussion of the first question. The first question here is, which of the following best describes the concept of the Caesar's effect with respect to the public finance? Let me tell you as to why we have asked this question in the pre-pareekshan test. See, recently the Reserve Bank of India has published a report highlighting the state of finances of the state government. In this particular report, the Reserve Bank of India has highlighted as to what is the present status of the government finances, that is the state governments. And in its report, RBI has used a term known as Caesar's effect with respect to public finance. So since RBI had used this particular term in its report, we have asked this question in our pre-pareekshan test. So what exactly is this Caesar's effect? Now, if you look at the 2 hands of Caesars, right? These 2 hands of the Caesars, they diverge. So they move in the opposite directions. So if you apply the same principle as far as public finance is concerned, the 2 hands can be considered to be revenue receipts or the revenue earned by the government, and the second hand is with respect to the expenditure. So when we say Caesar's effect, means revenue and expenditure are diverging. They're moving away from each other. I hope all of you must be knowing that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the amount of revenue which the government has earned, this has got reduced. While on the other hand, because of the economic slowdown, the government is required to pump in more amount of money in order to provide the economic stimulus, or to revive the animal spirits. So on one hand, the receipts has got reduced, whereas the expenditure of the government has increased. So there is a divergence between the receipts and the expenditure. So this itself, we refer it to as the Caesar's effect. I hope I made myself very clear in this, right? So this is a Caesar's effect, and accordingly, if you see the right answer to this particular question, it will be decline in the government's tax revenue accompanied by the increased expenditure. Now you must be wondering, how will I get to know all of these things? This was part of the RBI's report. How will I get to know these things? In fact, the topic of Caesar's effect we had covered in one of our focus magazine. So if you had gone through this focus magazine, probably you could have attempted this particular question very, very easily. Let's move to the next question. Okay, this question was extremely interesting. This question is from the theme of public finance. The question is, with respect to the GST Council, consider the following statements. And please have a look at the accuracy rate of the students. How many students have got it right? Only 5%. Only 5% of the students have got right a question related to the GST Council, which in a way happens to be the most basic topic as far as your Indian economy is concerned. It's the most basic topic. In spite of that, students' accuracy rate is just 5%. So let me take some time, explain to you certain aspects of GST Council, which could be tricky and could be targeted by UPSC in the prelims examination. So if you look at the GST Council, it is a constitutional body which has been set up under Article 279A of the Indian Constitution. So please understand, GST Council is not a statutory body. It is rather a constitutional body under Article 279A. Now, what is the role of GST Council? Now, that is where most of people gets confused. If you look at the role of the GST Council, please understand that the role of the GST Council is to give recommendations. This is the most important part. Role of the GST Council is to give recommendations. Recommendations with respect to what? Recommendations with respect to what goods and services can be brought under the ambit of GST. Which all goods, which all services should be part of GST. That is a recommendation given by the GST Council. Second one is the GST Council will recommend the rates on the GST. What should be the rates? What should be the GST rates on the goods and services? So please look at the word. GST Council will recommend the rates. But the question is, who will notify the rates then? The rates are notified by the respective governments. Respective governments means the central government will notify the GST rate and the state government will notify its own GST rate. For example, let's say on this particular marker, the GST rate happens to be 12%. And we know that GST is split into two, central GST and state GST. So out of this 12% GST on the marker, 6% GST will be the central GST and 6% GST will be the state GST. The central GST will be notified by the Ministry of Finance. To be more specific, Department of Revenue. With respect to state GST, once again notified by the respective state government. Are you getting this point? So please understand, GST Council does not notify the GST rates. It just recommends the GST rates. But once again, it so happens that whenever the GST Council recommends the GST rates, it is accepted and the rates are then notified. Next part is GST Council can decide the date on which petroleum products can be brought under the GST regime. I hope you must be knowing that as of now, petroleum products such as petrol, high-speed diesel, aviation turbine fuel, they are not part of the GST. But at the same time, in the GST Act, there is an explicit provision which mentions that the GST Council can decide the date on which these petroleum products will be brought under the GST. So this is the most important part. So if the petroleum products have to be brought under the GST, is there any need of constitutional amendment? No, there's no need for constitutional amendment because the GST Act itself empowers the GST Council to decide the date on which the petroleum products will be brought under the GST. Very important. Similarly, I hope you must be knowing that alcohol for human consumption, it is right now outside the ambit of GST. It is not part of the GST. So you have Article 366A. So Article 366 explicitly mentions that alcohol for the human consumption will not be part of GST. It explicitly mentions. What does this mean? It means that if you want to bring alcohol for human consumption under GST, there is a need for constitutional amendment. So in order to bring petroleum products under the GST, no constitutional amendment needed. But if you want to bring alcohol for human consumption under GST, constitutional amendment is needed because Article 366 specifically says so. Clear? Next, if you see, with respect to composition, now once again, most of students have problems with respect to the composition of GST Council. The GST Council has representation from the center, from the states, plus most importantly, it has representation from the union territories, which have legislative assemblies. So which are the union territories which have legislative assemblies? Delhi, Puducherry, and J&K. So these are the 3 union territories which have legislative assembly, and accordingly, they are given representation in the GST Council. So right now, we have 33 members in the GST Council. So if you look at the center is represented by the Union Finance Minister, right? Plus Minister of State for Finance. So 2 members coming from the center, and remaining 33 minus 2, that is 31 members coming from states and union territories. So most of the students have this perception that GST Council has representation only from center and states and not from the union territories. Union territories do have representation in the GST Council. Next and most important part is with respect to voting. If you look at the voting weightage of the center, it is 33.33%, and the voting weightage given to all the states as well as union territories put together, it is 66.66%. Now question is, how is this 66.66% divided among different states and different union territories? What do you think? Is it divided based upon the population, on the GST collection, or the GDP size? On what basis this 66.66% is divided among different states? Let me know in the chat box. This 66.66% is equally divided among all the states and union territories. So you have 33 members. Out of these, 2 members are from the center. So remaining 31 members, all of them, the 66.66% will be equally divided among the remaining members. So that is the voting. Apart from that, in order to take a decision, the votes, at least 75% of the votes have to agree to a particular decision. At least 75% of the votes have to agree to a particular proposal. So let's say, or consider a scenario where all the states and union territories have come together and they decide in a particular favor. How much votes can they get together? 66.66%. But what is the weightage that is needed to approve a proposal? 75%. So can I say here, center has a kind of virtual veto? It has a virtual veto because center on its own can reject the decision of a GST Council, right? So these are some things which you need to understand as far as GST Council is concerned. Quite tricky. Some things are quite tricky. Some things are not known to students. That is why, in order to make the students aware about these minute aspects about the GST Council, we had asked this particular question. So if you read the first question, the GST Council has been empowered to fix and notify the GST rates. They're not empowered to notify the GST rates. Second, the GST Council can recommend to bring petroleum products under the GST without the need for constitutional amendment. Yes. None of the union territories has been given the representation. No. So the right answer in this particular case should be 2 only. I hope I'm clear. Yes. So let's quickly move to the next question now. Okay, next question. Which of the following are eligible to be considered as government securities for the statutory liquidity ratio, SLR? Why we have asked this particular question? I hope you must be knowing that recently the Reserve Bank of India has come up with a retail direct scheme. Under the retail direct scheme, retail investors like you and me can make direct investment in the government securities, right? So as far as we are concerned, we do believe that if UPSC is going to ask you a question in the prelims examination, UPSC could ask you a question directly related to retail direct scheme or a question related to the government securities. So we have asked an indirect question related to this aspect of government securities. Question is, which can be considered as government securities for the calculation of statutory liquidity ratio? I hope all of you know the basics of SLR, statutory liquidity ratio. It is basically the percentage of depositors' money which the banks are required to keep aside in the form of cash, gold, and government securities. Everyone knows this. But what people don't know is, when you say government securities, which government securities can be considered as SLR securities? So that is why we have asked this particular question. So as far as government securities that can be considered for the SLR are dated securities, state development loans, cash management bills, and treasury bills. Special government securities cannot be considered as the SLR securities, and accordingly the right answer here should be C, 1, 2, 3, and 4 only. Okay, so please make a note of this aspect. Okay, now the next one. Which of the following are not the likely impacts of Fed tapering on the Indian economy? Not the likely impact. Now, why we have asked this question in our test? So far, the US Fed Bank had adopted the quantitative easing policy. And now slowly, the US Fed Bank has said that it may adopt the Fed tapering in future. It is expected that from month of March, the US Fed Bank will start adopting the Fed tapering. And accordingly, in number of newspapers, the likely impact of Fed tapering on the Indian economy was discussed. And from there, we had picked up this particular question. So as far as you are concerned, what you must do is you must understand what are the two types of policies which the US Fed Bank follows, that is quantitative easing and Fed tapering, and how these two policies have an impact on the Indian economy. So let me simplify this in the next 2 minutes. When you look at the quantitative easing, I hope you must have heard about the accommodative policy stance of the RBI, right? Accommodative policy stance of the RBI and quantitative easing policy of Fed Bank, both are same. So as part of accommodative policy stance, what does the RBI do? RBI injects more amount of rupees into the Indian economy. By injecting more amount of rupees into the Indian economy, we reduce the policy rates or the rates of interest on the loans. And this is basically adopted in order to revive the Indian economy, especially during the slowdown. Similarly, in US, as part of quantitative easing, the US Fed Bank will inject huge amount of dollars into US economy. How will it inject dollars? The US Fed Bank will buy the government securities issued by the US government, right? I hope you must have heard about open market operations in India, similar to that. So in US, the US Fed Bank will buy huge amount of US government securities, treasury securities, and then pump in dollars. So that is quantitative easing. Opposite of this is a Fed tapering. So in case of India, you must have heard about calibrated tightening. As part of calibrated tightening, what does the RBI do? RBI starts increasing the policy rates, right? Repo rate and all, they are increased in order to suck out the excess money supply from the economy. So by sucking out excess money supply, we will be able to control the inflation. So similarly in US, they follow Fed tapering. So as part of Fed tapering, slowly, I repeat, slowly, the US Fed Bank will start reducing the purchases of the US government securities. Look at the word. What does the word say? Tapering. Means slowly the government, the US Fed Bank will start reducing the purchases of the US government securities, which in turn will lead to decrease of dollars in the US economy, and hence the inflation can be controlled. The question is, in what way is it going to impact the Indian economy? Please concentrate on the last row. This is the most important part, and that is where questions can be expected as well. Let's say the US Fed Bank is following quantitative easing, where billions of dollars are pumped into the US economy. So what happens is higher dollar inflows into the Indian economy. These dollars will start coming into India. The FDI and FPI into the Indian economy will increase, and hence the value of rupee will start appreciating. On similar lines, as I said, because there is a surplus dollars in the US economy, FPI into India will increase. As we get more of FPI, automatically the demand for the government securities in India will increase. As the demand increases, bond prices will increase. And you know that there is an inverse relationship between bond prices and the bond yields. So as the bond prices increases, the bond yields will reduce. So remember this, whenever in US rate of interest is getting reduced, bond yields will also reduce. On similar lines, when US is going for Fed tapering, we'll be getting less amount of dollar inflows into the Indian economy. So as the dollar inflows into the Indian economy reduces, the rupee value will undergo depreciation. Similarly, as we get less amount of FPIs, or say higher outflow of dollars, demand for the government securities will reduce. The bond prices will reduce. So there is an inverse relationship between bond prices and bond yields, and hence the bond yields will increase. You must have seen that question which had appeared in the prelims 2021 with respect to yields, right? So that is where this thing becomes important. So in case of US, when the US Fed Bank is increasing the rate of interest, automatically in case of India, the bond yields will also start increasing. So this is what you must understand as far as your prelims examination is concerned. So if you're able to remember these aspects, that alone should be more than sufficient. So please have a look at the question. Which of the following is not the likely impact of Fed tapering on the Indian economy? So we have discussed that whenever there's a Fed tapering, the FPI inflows into the Indian economy will decrease. So this is wrong. The bond yields will increase, not decrease, right? So even this is wrong. So the rupee depreciation. So the rupee value will obviously undergo depreciation, right? But the question is not the likely impact. It is not asking what is the likely impact. So not the likely impact means these two things will be the answer. So right answer would be 1 and 2 only. I hope we are clear now. So let's move to the next one. With respect to RBI's revised prompt corrective action framework, consider the following statements. Why we had asked this particular question? Because recently the RBI has decided to revise the PCA framework, and accordingly we had asked this particular question. So what exactly is PCA framework? Prompt corrective action framework. See, as part of PCA framework, the RBI keeps on monitoring the financial health of the banks in terms of certain indicators. And if the financial health of the banks is getting deteriorated, automatically the RBI will bring a bank under the PCA framework, prompt corrective action framework. And when a bank is brought under the PCA framework, automatically the RBI will then impose a number of restrictions on the banks, which could be with respect to giving of loans to a particular sector, giving of dividend payments to the shareholders. And in extreme cases, the RBI can even supersede the board of directors of the banks as well. So please remember these things. So if you look at the earlier framework and the revised framework, I have incorporated this in the form of table. You can see earlier regime, it covered all the scheduled commercial bank, including the small finance banks and the payment banks. But now we have excluded the small finance banks and payment banks. That's the first thing. Second, if you see regional rural banks and cooperative banks, earlier, the regional rural banks and cooperative banks, they are not covered under the PCA framework. Instead of PCA framework, they were covered under the RBI's supervisory action framework or the NABARD's supervisory action framework. Supervisory action framework is similar to the prompt corrective action, but the nomenclature is different. And even now, these things are going to be continued to be covered under the same framework as earlier. But one important difference is with respect to parameters used. See, earlier we used to use 4 parameters: capital adequacy ratio, net NPA, leverage ratio, and return on assets. Return on assets basically means the overall profits. So if the profits of a bank for consecutive 3 years was negative, it means if bank was facing losses for consecutive 3 years, earlier this parameter was used to place a bank under the prompt corrective action. But now we have done away with this return on assets. Clear? So that's the most important difference. So based upon this understanding, we had asked this question. The revised framework is applicable to all the scheduled banks, small finance banks, and payment banks. As I said, it's not applicable to small finance banks and payment banks. The revised framework tracks the financial performance of all the banks in terms of 4 parameters, including the return on assets. No. So right answer is neither 1 nor 2. Now coming to the last question here. Let's have a look at the last question. This question is with respect to centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes. These are the 2 schemes which are right now implemented by the central government. So let's understand as to what are centrally sponsored schemes and the central sector schemes. In order to make it easier for your understanding, I have incorporated these things: central sector schemes and centrally sponsored schemes. So if you look at central sector schemes, they are completely financed and implemented by the center. Whereas centrally sponsored schemes, as far as financing is concerned, financing is provided by both center and state in a defined proportion, which could be, say, 70-30, 60-40, and so on. So if it is 70-30 means center will provide 70, 30% will be provided by the state government. And when it comes to the implementation of centrally sponsored scheme is by the respective state government. Further, if you will see central sector schemes, they are basically on the subjects which are placed under the union list. I hope you know that under the Indian Parliament, you have 3 lists: union list, state list, and concurrent list. So the central sector schemes are predominantly on the subjects placed under the union list. But at the same time, some of the central sector schemes also focus upon the subjects which are part of the state list and the concurrent list. Now, for example, you must be knowing that agriculture is a state list, right? Agriculture is part of state list. So you have 2 central sector schemes, that is PM Kisan and PM Asha. As far as centrally sponsored schemes are concerned, some of the centrally sponsored schemes include MG Narega, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, and so on. So if you look at the question here, the centrally sponsored schemes are financed and implemented by both center and states. No, the centrally sponsored schemes are financed by both center and state, but implemented by whom? They are implemented by the respective state government. The central sector schemes are applicable to only those subjects which are under the union list or the concurrent list. Not necessarily, because as I said, some of the central sector schemes can also be on the subjects which are part of the state list. So even this statement is wrong. PM Kisan is a centrally sponsored scheme. No, it is a central sector scheme. So accordingly, the right answer would be 1, 2, and 3, because it is asking for incorrect statements. I hope we are clear now. So these are some of the questions which we had asked in our pre-Pareekshan test. So if your basics were stronger, if your basics were good, then probably you could have attempted most of the questions. So since you have attempted the pre-Pareekshan test, please try to carry out analysis of your performance. Try to understand where you have gone wrong, why you have gone wrong. For example, let's say if you have already studied about GST Council, in spite of studying about GST Council, if you're still committing mistakes, it means that there is some knowledge gap, and this knowledge gap would have to be filled up in the next 100 days. Similarly, you had a question related to Fed tapering. And if you have committed a mistake in Fed tapering, this means that you have not studied the newspapers correctly, because you must have been coming across this news of Fed tapering in the newspapers repeatedly. So this shows that probably you have not read the newspapers correctly, and you have not linked the newspaper or the current affairs articles to the core part of your syllabus. So carry out such kind of analysis, try to identify your weak areas and keep on working upon those weak areas in the next 100 days. And as I said, while preparing Indian economy, give highest importance to the theme of banking and finance. Next is external sector. And the third one is the sector of taxation. So these are the most important themes, right? So keep on revising what all things you have studied so far. Apart from that, as and when the Prelims Compass 2022 is released, keep going to the Prelims Compass 2022. It will give a lot of value addition to your preparation. And at the same time, attempt the pre-pareekshan test. In case if you have not attempted the previous pre-pareekshan test, attempt those tests. Try to find out to what extent you have been able to understand various economy related concepts, right? Fine, then that's the end of the discussion as far as Indian economy is concerned.